Because it's also streaming.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, perfect. So welcome to everyone. We're delighted today to welcome Marta Cartabia here for this conversation interview with myself and Joseph. Joseph normally says she needs no introduction, and that is true, but nonetheless, as you know from our invitation, Marta has had a glittering career. She is professor at Bocconi University in Italy, but she is also Minister for Justice of the Italian Republic, and before that she was a president of the Italian Constitutional Court. She has been a distinguished scholar for many years. She was a Strauss Fellow here at NYU, sharing the same space, 22 Washington Square North, with many of you.
The best year in your life.
The best year in my life, I can tell you. Absolutely.
So it's a great pleasure and an honor to welcome her here and to have the chance to hear from her about her experience in these impressive public positions. I don't know, do you want to begin?
So, thanks. Let's just jump right into it, Marta. So, you were until quite recently president of the Constitutional Court, and you served for 9 years on the court, right?
Yeah. And
then within a very short period, you became Minister of Justice. What's the biggest difference that you're finding in your life between being President of the Constitutional Court and Minister of Justice of Italy?
Well, it is a big, big difference under many respects. But it's a different type of activity, first of all, because as a Minister of Justice, you have to take decision, being responsible as an individual. Well, there are many differences. The first one is that as a member of the Constitutional Court is a very, very high responsibility, but you share your responsibility with the other 14 people. And so the impression is that you do your best, but your decisions are always checked by the other, shared with the other. And so the feeling is that you are contributing to something, but that it is not only on your shoulders. So as far as the feeling of the responsibility is much different, even if the Constitutional Court can, erase law, change pieces of legislation, the importance of they affect very much the life of people as well as the legal system. But it is also very different from the point of view of the kind of activity. A court in general, a judge, answer what is requested to do, but they have not to imagine how to fix a problem. When I arrived as a Minister of Justice, the judiciary in Italy, I had clear my main purpose. It was to reduce the disposition time, the length of procedure, but I didn't know how to do it. So I have to be much more creative, inventive, and I had to set up my own agenda in order to achieve that goal. The goal was the result of an agreement with the European Commission, so that was very, very high stakes, I have to say, because we are expected to reduce our disposition time by the 40% in civil procedure in 5 years and 25% in criminal procedures, but that was it. So how to get to that point? Everything was to be created and invented. So two main differences, I would say.
Which is more stressful?
Being in the court and being a Minister of Justice. You cannot stay for 9 years a Minister of Justice. This is not human, absolutely.
Gronia, is it okay if I ask 2 more questions?
Sure.
And then hand over? So the second question is of the second nature. You were a constitutional law scholar. You were commenting on decisions of the Constitutional Court. You were writing. What's the biggest difference between being a constitutional law professor and suddenly finding yourself writing the decisions that previously you were criticizing?
The main difference is that you can, as an academic, you can easily do a good job criticizing what other people do. when you have to do a different thing, and this is something that I've learned after passing from the academic life through the practical life, even if it is different in constitutional court and the member of government, is that you cannot stop at the point of saying this is not good, criticizing, seeing the contradiction, pointing out the problems that the decision can provoke, but you have to have an alternative in mind. And if ever I had the time to go back to my first love, which is academic life, I would like to try to do my academic work, maybe on criticizing what is wrong, but trying to give an alternative. Because what I look for when I am a Minister of Justice and I have to take a new decision, it is a new idea, new alternatives, new possibility, which sometimes is not part of the critical work of the scholarship.
So now I have one last question in this first round. So taking you back to your role on the Constitutional Court, either as judge or as president. So first of all, what was the toughest decision that you faced, and why was it so tough? And secondly, what was the most important decision that you might say, I had an important role? I know it's a college, etc., but I'm sure there's some decision you can say, there I was the rapporteur or something like that. So first, what was the toughest decision you faced in your 9 years on the court? Really difficult. How should I decide this?
The German and the Italian issue on the diplomatic immunity. Probably some of you have heard about this decision. Because there were so many issues from the political point of view, historical point of view, human rights, but also from the technical point of view, there were things that do not even appear in the final reasoning of the court that made this decision very difficult, either from the technical point of view and also from the
maybe I can give some context. This is a case that goes back to German atrocities in Italy during the Second World War. And then there was a claim to pay reparations to some of the victims who were never paid reparations. Long story short, Germany said, we signed an agreement with Italy, we paid them a lump sum, there was an agreement, the matter is closed. Some plaintiffs who never saw a penny go to court. Eventually, Germany takes Italy to the International Court of Justice and says there's sovereign immunity, which is a principle of international law. And it's breaking international law by having Germany being judged in Italian courts. The International Court of Justice agrees with Germany. Then it goes back to Italy and it reaches the Constitutional Court. And the decision of the Constitutional Court, which shocked everybody, but somebody admired it and many criticized it, was, in this case, we cannot obey the decision of the International Court of Justice because there's a principle of fundamental human rights, a very deep principle of fundamental human rights, and unfortunately, that is something we have to guarantee to our citizens so they can go to the Italian courts and get judgments against Germany. Was it a unanimous decision?
No.
And
well,
will
I
you
cannot
tell us?
say so. I mean, sorry.
Got you.
No, because we don't have, separate votes and dissenting opinions. So, in principle, you don't know whether or not. But there are so many publications on it that it's well known that it was a split court that decided on the.
And you would have followed the International Court, or may I not ask that?
Well, that's why it's still difficult for me today to speak about that decision, because it's the way from the legal point of view it is presented is, what does it matter most, human dignity or state immunity? There is no doubt if you ask the question in this way. For me, it's for sure human dignity is more important, is the core value that every court, every judge, every legal scholar has to, a scholar or acting person is to be committed to. And especially you cannot, second, it is very difficult because we are speaking on a part of the history of Europe which is shameful. So it's difficult to defend state immunity in that case. But things were much more complicated because it was accepted by Italy that all this problem of the damages were solved by a political agreement. And so in my view, it was more correct not to follow the International Court of Justice, but to say the problem was solved at the political level, and so there is no more issue for a judicial action.
We will have plenty of time for questions from the audience, but now I'm going to hand over to Grania.
But sure. You also asked another question.
Yes, that's true.
What was the second question?
The decision you're most proud of.
Well, the decision, there is a set of decisions I'm very proud of. One is this Taricco case that probably some of you have heard if you study some European law, which is, to see that something that I started study as a PhD, it was part of my PhD thesis, meaning that conflicts of laws between national level and European level has to find a way to be solved by means of judicial dialogue. That was the core of my PhD thesis. In the end, became a real part of our legal system, and in a way that I think it was beneficial for everybody. So even if I was not the judge rapporteur in that case, for me it was by far the best satisfaction, the best feeling that I had, because it was something that really I felt that all the work that I've done as a scholar, as a student, could become part of a living legal system in Italy and also in other countries. So I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, so Marta, one of the things that I think students often say to us when they leave law school and go into practice is, nothing I learned in law school seems particularly relevant to the world of practice. It's such a different world, and what we're doing bears so little relationship to the classroom and so on. That's obviously an exaggeration, but I wonder to what extent your work as an academic has proven relevant to what you're doing as a minister. I mean, is there such a disjunction between the life of an academic, being a scholar, and then, as you put it, the decision-making context that you're in now as Minister for Justice? Or is there more continuity between those roles? Can you see what your work as an academic, your life as an academic brings to this role? I think it's easier for us to imagine that in your work on the court, but it maybe it would be interesting to hear a bit more about your work in the ministry.
Okay. Well, I would say that if I have to think to my law school in Italy, the way I was taught law in my law school, I would say that your students are right, because my degree was and the kind of how do you say, the legal framework that I was given was study the laws, the treatises on the law, books, handbooks, learning a lot of notions. That is something that you forget immediately afterwards. Well, I'm a little bit much too severe in the sense that it was very important, in my view, to have some categories, principles, but I missed very much something that, on the contrary, I've found here in the American law school. I've learned from you guys, and for the time that I've spent here and in other cases in Ann Arbor and in other classrooms, because I have the feeling that the law schools in the American system is much more close to what happens in the practice, especially in courts, at the bar, the kind of activity that you have to do. Why? Because here you always start by cases, problems. Very seldom you spend your time listening to somebody who is lecturing for hours and hours. You are much more involved, at least in Professor Weiler classes, I know how it works. You are challenged with the questions, and you are really trained to use your legal tools in order to use them in practice. So I consider that you are very lucky guys. You should feel much less than an Italian students of law the distinction between theory and practice, school and practical life. So I would say that the most important thing for me going from the academy to the Constitutional Court was the thing that I've learned here, how to reason, how to write, how to consider the counter arguments and to try to use them for final decision. Having the responsibility of the Ministry of Justice is really another story. You have to cope with a number of first of all, you are always on the spotlights. And this is something that for me is very stressful because I'm very focused on what I have to do, and the fact that the thing that you do can be perceived and reported in a different way is something that I've not learned, neither in the law school, not at the Constitutional Court, not even here in the United States. Second, you have to learn how to get to compromises with the political parties, because it is true that the responsibility is much more individual, but each decision does not depend only on what you would like to see. You have to consider that maybe you have to leave apart a good answer to a certain problem, a good proposal, simply because it is not shared by the political parties. This way of bargaining and to try to do your best, even if your idea are not the thing that you can propose are not the pure imaging and the pure model that you have in mind, is much more difficult. But this is something also that is the most fascinating part of the work that I'm doing now as a Minister of Justice, trying to learn how to get to a result, even if you have to make a lot of detour in your way.
So can I follow up with that? I was going to say, what would you think are the most important qualities or skills that make you or anyone, an effective, a good Minister for Justice? Would you say it is the capacity to create compromise?
I would say so. At least in Italy, in this moment, with this government, I don't know if everybody of you is aware, it is a government that has a very strong leadership with, a strong professional as a leader, but also that is made and supported by a huge number of parties, from the right to the left, to the extreme left in the parliament, and so you have always all the time to try to figure out how to put together people that think in opposite ways, especially on judicial issues in Italy.
And was that skill important on the court, the capacity to weave a compromise, or is it a very different?
Absolutely, yes. This a little bit different, but for me, the work of a constitutional court is always to try to balance competing values. Here you have to balance competing political parties, which is a little bit different. But in a way, the kind of attitude is exactly the same. And I would say that in a good law school, I'm sure that this is something that you already have. One of the first things that I consider important to learn is how to get out of a conflict, to get out with a proposal that is a good result for all the people. So negotiation and all these kind of soft skills are very, very much important for all lawyers, whatever the thing that you have to do as at the bar or in the judiciary or I don't know, maybe in the Advocate General of the United States, whatever is the future that wait for you. Yeah.
One more question. You're a woman occupying two very prominent positions that in what's normally a very male-dominated world and environment. Have you found that to be in any way an obstacle? Have you encountered at any stage, either on the court or in your role in the ministry, you know, have you found any kind of challenges that you think might not have you might not have encountered them had you been male, or has it been relatively seamless, relatively?
No. Well, first of all, I have to say the first 3 years in the Constitutional Court, I was the only woman in the court, and the other were 14 men. I would say that there were no formal obstacles, but there were, you know, some kind of attitudes that you know, highlighted that I was a woman. I remember one episode that was unacceptable for me, but I accepted nevertheless. It was that we had just elected a new Chief Justice, a new President, and one of the tasks of the President is to take note of what is the discussion in the court in order to keep a sort of summary of the main points. And this was a wonderful guy, a very respected scholar. And he said, well, I'm not sure that I am able to do this. This Marta is able to do this for me. So I was one of the judges, but the feeling was that I was treated like the secretary of the group. I've never rejected, I've never opposed these kind of things, but very much often I've thought, would this have been asked to a man? I was probably the younger in that moment, because it is true that I was appointed in the court much younger than the others. But that was not because of the age. It was much more because, you know, this kind of work are the kind of stereotypes. The secretary of the group is a woman, so we have a woman, why not to ask her? And he was giving me a lot of power, by the way. Because if I, well, that's true, because I could have changed the notes and the results of the discussion, but it was not the intention, I guess.
Very short follow-up. Is the reason you didn't raise it because you were new to the court, you didn't want to be, you know, to cause any embarrassment to anyone, or was it more that you thought, well, maybe I can actually do something with this, or what prevented you from gently raising the stereotype involved?
Because this is really personal. I'm not teaching to women or how to behave in this context. This was my personal attitude. I don't like to get into conflict because of that. I am a woman. I want to be recognized. I prefer my time in the court, and even now, is try to show that we deserve respect from what we do, not simply opposing or refusing to do things in order to contesting something. Even if that was really a wrong thing, so I could have reacted in a different way, but that's not my temperament, so okay.
So I want to change the register a bit and move away from your personal experience and raise some issues of constitutional law which are not specifically Italian. In fact, they are confronting all countries which we used to call Western liberal democracies. So one is, it's a huge debate in Germany, for example. It's a huge debate in the United States. Can the government force people to vaccinate and say you are obliged to vaccinate by law? And you know that there are people who say that's a violation of fundamental human rights, etc. What is your view? Not the view of your government, but what is your view as a constitutional?
Well, actually, I've wrote a decision of the Constitutional Court on this point, but in the Italian case, this is very easy because it is the Constitution itself that says that for public reason, for reasons of public safety, the law, you need a law, can impose medical treatment on people, because we have this, this is really the Italian Constitution stating and recognizes the individual rights, which in the sphere of medical treatment implies freedom to accept or not to accept, generally speaking, a medical treatment. But we always have this social, or if you want, collective dimension of fundamental rights that see, in the case of health care and medical treatment, explicitly says that in general the legislator, the parliament, can decide that in order to protect the health of all the people, you can impose medical treatment. So in 2018, I came to write a decision on the imposition of the usual vaccination, not this new one about COVID. That is a decision that upheld the legislation imposing some 10 vaccination on the young child, the usual one. It is true that in my personal view, it is always much better to persuade people rather than imposing. So even in that case, I was writing some part of the reasoning saying that the obligation, the imposition, making a vaccination mandatory is always the last resort to be explored by the parliament. I prefer persuasion rather than imposition, but I think that something like the Green Pass, the policy taken by our government, is not only reasonable, but it is indeed completely compliant with the constitutional principles.
And you would, even if the Constitution didn't have that express provision, so you were just involved in the classic balancing of interest with the more opaque Constitution, would you still adopt the position of the Italian Constitution, that the collective health
I would say so, because I don't think that we can state that our liberty can be absolute. It is not in many other cases. We live in a society, so my freedom, my liberty has to come to term with the life of others, and so I consider that rights and liberty comes with their limitations, and this is one of the limitations that reasonably can be imposed in the given situation in this pandemic that is affecting so much social life and the life of people.
So here is a question. Every minister in a member state of the European Union is also part of the Council of Ministers of the European Union. So it's in that sense. So we have this drama on the border between Belarus and Poland and Lithuania and Latvia. And of course it's shameful because these people are invited to go there and then they are sent by the Belarusian government to the border as a means of imposing pressure. But at the same time there are 3,000-4,000 people sitting there who are freezing to death. It's a difficult dilemma, isn't it? A minute ago you said human dignity, etc. And there are different views. Some NGOs are saying, yes, we understand the politics, but we are seeing 3,000-4,000 people freezing to death. Children have died already. And others are saying it's a moral hazard. If we allow them to come in, it will just mean more will come, etc. Tell us how you think about that problem. And as part of the general problem of migration, where Europe has a checkered history. If Merkel hadn't opened the German borders to 1 million or so, it wouldn't be such a proud story in the history of Europe. So it's a kind of cluster of questions inviting you to share some of your thoughts.
Well, my first thought is first save people and then start reasoning. First, a human being first. If you have people that are freezing, that they are human beings, and so the first thing to do is to try to give them shelter and to save their lives. Second feeling is that it's really time for the European Union to try to do something as European Union for migration, because we have the same problem in Italy. We have different borders that in different moments of the history are the border where there is this immigration pushing from the Mediterranean or from the Belarus or from whatever you want to say. So I think that this is the second issue. We are not doing enough, as this is not in my domain. It's not a Minister of Justice, it's not the Council of the Ministers of Justice that has the power on that point, but I think that this is a clear point where Europe has to find the European Union its original spirit, which is a spirit of solidarity, that is something that we have rediscovered in the pandemic with this big recovery fund, but in the issue of immigration we are, in my view, far from a good policy at the European level.
So my last question in this round is still taking us to that part of Europe, and the crisis of the rule of law, most notably in a country like Poland or a country like Hungary, which has reached a certain climax with the Polish Constitutional Court simply declaring we cannot accept the supremacy of European Union law, even of some parts of the treaty, but it's not only there. We saw the German Constitutional Court, but the Poles and the Hungarians have taken it an extra mile. And the policy dilemma now that one sees is that some member states of the European Union are saying this touches our most fundamental values, the rule of law. How can we compromise on that? And we should throw the book at Poland and at Hungary and use every instrument in our toolkit, withholding, finance, etc. And other member states, like Germany notably, saying, no, it's always better to have engagement, to talk, to try and avoid confrontation. Where does Italy stand on this?
Italy stays with Europe. I mean, no, I think that there are a few fundamental values on which our relationship in the European Union is built: the respect of human rights, the independence of the judiciary, the very basic notion of the system based on the rule of law, and this is something that you cannot overlook if they are not respected. The simple fact, as a Minister of Justice, I would say that giving the power to the government to appoint and remove judges is really going back of years of history, and even if it is a very independence of the judiciary is much more than that, at least these are the basic notion, the basic contents of the independence that should be preserved. So I can understand why, and I can support the decision of opening the infringement procedure and all the rest that has been doing at the European level. In the meanwhile, if I had to take the decision, thanks God it's not in my power to take this decision, I would try to take a decision that does not cut away any part, any country of Europe, but try to find a way to push them, maybe in a powerful way, persuading them to reconsider the importance and the respect of the rule of law and all of that. So I understand why there were some strong decisions taken by the Court of Justice, the Commission. I fully support them, but in my view, it's not a good idea to come to a poll exit or something like that.
Yes, so maybe your earlier, the theme you described in your thesis of dialogue, I guess the question is, can dialogue solve the situation we're in, or do we ever reach a stage at which dialogue is no longer possible or it's not productive? But I suppose those are the questions facing us. Maybe one question, both quite broad questions, one about Italy, one about the EU. So in your time, and if you can't answer this, that's fully understood in your position, but in your time on the Constitutional Court, was there any dimension of the practice or work of the court where you felt that's an area that needs reform, that's something that needs change?
In Europe?
No, on the court, on the Constitutional Court.
Well, we have done some reform, but yes, I think there are two very classical points in the debate, and here we have Pasquale Pasquino, who is really the expert on the judicial review of legislation and different systems. One of the point of the debate is dissenting opinion and so on and so forth, and I think that could be a good idea, but not the most important one. The most important one is to enlarge a bit the access to the court, because the Constitutional Court in Italy does not have direct review, does not have the, how do you call it, the Beschwerde, the Verfassungsbeschwerde, the individual complaint to the Constitutional Court. You can only get to the court by means of the intermediation of a judicial body, the incidental procedure. So the result is that the Constitutional Court oftentimes cannot get to say a word on some issue, and cannot get to say her word timely when the debate is open. For example, during the pandemic, there was this issue about the use or misuse or certain type of acts of the government, the use of decrees by the president of the government instead of using laws, the usual topics that relates to the state of emergency. But the court had said a pronounced decision 1.5 years later, because there is no possibility to get directly to the Constitutional Court. So I would say that if ever a reform of the Constitutional Court is to be done, is to give each individual the possibility to get to the court, but this implies also the power to select the decision, because otherwise it can become overwhelmed. And also not to confine the jurisdiction of the Constitutional Court only to review of legislation. There are so many administrative acts and other acts that can affect the respect of the Constitution and individual rights, that there is no reason for being the court only a court that can judge legislation as it is in this moment in the Italian Constitutional Court.
Okay, maybe the last question then is just moving to the EU level, a much broader one, but there is at the moment this conference on the future of Europe, another attempt to think about the challenges facing Europe and so on. If you had to take the single most important change or reform that the EU needs, if you had to select one, what would you choose? Where does the EU need to?
I have no idea. I've not thought about that. I'm sorry. I think that I'm not prepared. I probably can repeat the issue of immigration,
sure,
which is something, but Maybe if you ask me the same question tomorrow, I can give you another answer. But in this moment, the feeling that I have is that indeed immigration is something that is really
I'll send you a long list. Let me ask you, just again, change register a bit. What brings you to the United States, apart, of course, from coming and talking to us?
This is the main reason. Indeed, no, really. I always take the opportunity to come back as soon as I can. Really, the New York City, the New York Law School is fantastic. You guys are really lucky guys. But anyway, I came, the main reason was to visit Attorney General Merrick Garland, because we have a number of judicial cooperation with the United States. I also had a wonderful conversation with him around the program of judicial reforms that I am trying to implement in Italy, because a number of them draw inspiration from some statutes and some pieces of legislation that are well known in the United States, and so I wanted also to have an exchange of view with him. I had a specific case to discuss with him, which is the transfer of an Italian citizen that is in jail here in Florida, asking to serve his sentence in Italy. And I wanted also to have the opportunity to, thanks to the help of Ambassador Zappia and our council here, to present the reform, what is going on in Italy, to a number of people that can be interested, from business to schools to banks and other investors, because there is a strong link between a judicial system that is properly functioning and the development of economic life, which is something that I've learned as a Minister of Justice, and we wanted to have some exchange of view with all these people.
So before I ask my next question, this will be the time perhaps to start thinking what your questions might be to the Minister, because we'll have one or two more questions and then we'll open the floor if there are any questions or comments from you. Marta, you served as a professor. That's a pretty busy job. Then you were a judge on the Constitutional Court. Now you're a minister. And yet you have a family, you have children. What's been your way of balancing your professional life with your private life? Always a dilemma, and
always a dilemma.
In the world that we live in, it tends to be, maybe it should not be, but it tends to be more a dilemma for women than for men.
Well, first I have to say that this is always a concern for me. How much am I imposing on the shoulder of my kids, especially my kids, also my husband, but especially my kids, because I'm doing so much. I'm away from home almost all the week, and so I cannot say, oh, okay, this is not a problem. No, it is a concern of mine. I've always, my thoughts are for my kids and how much they are paying, in a way, decision and responsibility that were asked to myself. At the end of the day, I think that if we have not yet provoked a major disaster, it was first of all because of how much my husband has been supportive, not only from the physical and material point of view. He was in Milan while I was in Rome. He took care of the kids while I was doing other things, but also because, and this is the most important thing when kids grow up, that he fully understand and support the fact of accepting responsibility in public life as something that is relevant, not only from the personal point of view, but for the meaning of what is work, after all, is giving our contribution to social life. And so I think this is the main value that he's helping me to convey to my kids, and that is why, after all, I am convinced that it was reasonable to accept all these challenges. It was easier as a member of the Constitutional Court because a lot of work could be done at home. As a Minister of Justice is crazy. It's simply crazy because you have all the time things and problems that are going on. So it's a 7-20-hour really responsibility.
So one last question, and then we'll invite if there are any questions from our audience. You recently wrote a book in Italian, very, very successful, and hopefully, despite long gestation, there will be also a version in English, dealing with Greek tragedy. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this is something that I've just lectured in the Scuola d'Italia Guglielmo Marconi about one of these Greek tragedies. The book that you are mentioning is about Edipo Re, which is Oedipus Rex, which is, you know, a famous tragedy of this man who is a great, great king, but in the end he resulted as being the man who assassinated his father and became the husband of his mother. So it was, you know, the kind of mythology that everybody knows and have been explored from the psychological point of view, but it is also, this tragedy is a wonderful criminal investigation, because the king has to find who is responsible for the destruction of the city, and after this investigation he finds out to be himself the reason why Thebe is under destruction, because of the gods were not in favor of this. But also I'm making the same experiment with another very interesting tragedy. This is not translated in English. I very much hope to do it, which is taken from Aeschylus' Orestea, the transformation of justice from, I don't know the English word, Erinni to Eumenidi, which is from the idea of justice as revenge, to justice as a tribunal, as the possibility of reconciliation of all the society. This is a wonderful plot. Why am I interested in writing and thinking about our legal system, starting from the Greek myth and the Greek tragedy? Because first of all, I think that in those classical texts you find problems and questions that are really evergreen in every society, in all times, all ages, all levels, something that really belongs to the human experience as such. Second, they are really very, very fascinating because they put this problem not in philosophical terms or legal terms, but they tell you stories. So the narrative approach is something that is very, very effective to be. Also, we need images, stories, we need actors and situations that we have in our mind in order to keep in mind some values. And third, they are very powerful because they do not belong to any specific country, any specific historical moment. They are mythological. So we are more unbiased when we reflect on what kind of justice we want, what kind of political life we want, when we do not have in mind a specific situation, because we are thinking in general, in a mythological, there is this, the commentator says, they have this tragic distance between our days and the way they tell the stories, that is more easier for us to be unbiased and to really go deeper in some reflection. So it is an exercise that I enjoyed so much, and my project was also to continue in this line, and I will do it maybe one day or another.
So now is the time to open the floor if there are any questions that people want to pose. Yes, Andre.
So, Andre Leng is my name. I'm a fellow here at NYU. One of the responsibilities of many ministries of justice and justices in liberal democracies across the globe is to review the compatibility of legislative proposals with the Constitution. Is that also, at least to some extent, the case in Italy? And if so, how is this role in the context of pre-enactment review comparable or different from post-enactment review as a constitutional judge? How does kind of the necessity of bargaining with other political actors in the political process affect pre-enactment review as a Minister of Justice?
Thank you. Should we answer immediately, I guess?
Yes.
Well, we do not have, in Italy, the Minister of Justice does not have that much this power to review the compatibility with the constitution of legislation, but it is true that I act as a Minister of Justice and as a guardasigilli, meaning exactly that I have to put the final signature on all the pieces of legislation, and if I see some problems, I cannot stop it, but I can flag it before it comes to an end. In Italy, the power not to promulgate a piece of legislation if there are major problems of compatibility with the Constitution is for the President of the Republic. He can send it back to the Parliament and say, okay, stop here because here you have a major problem, you have to correct it, otherwise it cannot be promulgated. But generally speaking, I would say that ex ante review of legislation is always something that is more general and is not able really to capture the problem, the issues of constitutionality of a piece of legislation. You can see it if there is, an open statement against the Constitution, but in experience as a member of the Constitutional Court, I can tell you that ex post review of legislation is much more powerful because you can see the way the legislation that you are reviewing produces effect on concrete cases. Is it in that specific moment, in the concrete application of the law, that you can see the unconstitutional effects of a legislation, whereas in abstract terms, you really have to have a legislation that is openly in contrast with the articles of the Constitution, which is usually not the case. It seems to be a more effective way because you stop the legislation before entering into force. But if you want to have this kind of control, you have also to complement it with the ex post facto, because it's impossible to see the problems always from an extra point of view.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights with us. And Professor Weiler mentioned some tough situations, and when people are making normative judgments, there are different things that people can prioritize. So, for example, some people might prioritize like dignity. Some people might say like equality or like mercy. Is there like a virtue or value that you always try to go for when it comes to like tough decisions?
I'm not sure I can completely understand your question. Is there what?
Oh yeah, is there like a virtue or value that you always try to go for when it comes to tough decisions? Anything you prioritize before others?
Well, I would say that not by choice, but because of my history, what I prioritize is always to try to ensure that the Constitution is fully respected in all its parts. Because I am a constitutional lawyer, I've been Constitutional Court for many years, so my approach is always driven by the fact that I try to fully implement all the values of the Constitution. A thing that I don't think is useful is to try to pick and choose one or the other constitutional value. The Constitution is valuable as a whole. So you cannot decide either equality or liberty, dignity or freedom of religion. It is something that it works if all the values of the Constitution are taken into consideration altogether. Thank you.
Yes, let's go ahead.
I want to come up to this question. You have an experience of discussing and finding compromise in the setting of the court, of the Constitutional Court, and now, as a Minister of Justice, it seems that may be different because in the court, people present arguments where political parties may present interests. So can you say, how is your experience moving from discussing legal, sophisticated arguments and what happens in your now job?
No, that's true. Thank you very much. This relates also to the point that we touched upon with Gronia. It is true that both as a constitutional judge and a Minister of Justice, I have the best qualities to trying to compromise, to negotiate, to mediate between different positions. But that's true. That's a very relevant point. Thank you for raising this point, because the main difference is that in the Constitutional Court, you get to a compromise by means of strong arguments. The more powerful is your argument, the most possibility of success you have inside the court, inside the work of the 15 judges, because this is the common language of judges. Sometimes even then number counts, because after all, when we don't agree, we have to decide whether 7, 8 or 9 people agree on. But you can see that people can change their mind according to the solidity of the argument that you are proposing. The same is true, it's partially true also in the political life. But in the political life, as far as I'm knowing it nowadays in Italy, I don't know if everywhere is the same, is that because of many reasons, some political parties on some issue, they don't want even to start discussing, because they say, no, this is out of question. For us, it has always been our flag, our battle, our point. We don't want, for a number of reasons, the consensus, the many, many reasons. So this is a point that we don't even start to put on the table. That's the most difficult part for me, because I am able to be open to change my mind in front of persuading arguments. But when people say, no, 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 this is out, like a kid that don't want to eat the cup of milk or whatever, I don't have any resource to try to move so the result is that the space of compromise is reduced, because each party has its own point that does not want to put on the table. And so you have to decide in a smaller place, you have a smaller number of options. That's true, that's very interesting.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Minister, for sharing your time and your insights with us and at NYU. I wanted to ask you about the rule of law crisis in the European Union. How do you see the end of it? Do you see Hungary and Poland changing course? Or will this rule of law question become a kind of constant existential question for the EU whenever there is perhaps a bigger member state becoming, in a way, fan of the illiberal democracy ideas and thus a constant source of tensions in the European Union? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have the possibility, I don't have a prediction, I cannot foresee what happens. But I can tell you that my hope, I'm confident that the importance per se of certain values can in the end prevail also in the country that in this moment are in a different position. I cannot say, I don't like saying I'm optimistic, I'm pessimistic, because there is always a problem of human liberty, human decision. It's up also to these countries to decide what they want to become. One thing that I consider that over time, in the long term, the importance of certain values has its own force, and I'm confident that this force can prevail in the end.
Thank you, dear Minister, for this elaborate and beneficial presentation. As you mentioned, you say that balancing political interests is more like hard than balancing in the constitutional law. Like there is some certain critics from scholars that when pragmatic relations or strategic alliances are omnipresent, the European Union is not very eager to shame and name the human rights violators in the world. There's some certain critic of that. For example, when that critic really like present in Turkish opposition's civil society, given the fact that like Turkish government, according to them, using immigration leverage to actually decrease the critics from European Union about human rights violations in Turkey. What is your opinion about that balancing in European Union's response to human rights violators in the world when there is a strategic alliance or pragmatic results when they name and shame the human rights violators? Do you think that this is too hard, or do you find it like so hard to put strategic alliances beyond the principles?
I don't know. I don't have a specific answer to this question, but I can tell you that the political figure that I admire, that give me inspiration, are the kind of people that are able to combine ideals and values with pragmatism. I think that political life require a combination of the two. Even in Italian history, we have fantastic figures that I read again and again, because they are able really to come to terms with reality, and reality is made of a number of things: economic constraints, alliance, real possibilities, a number of things that the context give you in that moment. They do not diminish their commitment to their ideal values, but they know that in order to get to that point, they have to work with pragmatism as well. So I think that a quality for a good politician is the combination of the two.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. One, to come back on your own personal history. You were saying, I mean, if you were probably more, you would be more constructive now as an academic, given the fact that you have been a minister. But the question I would ask to you is, would you be also less critical? Or you would be as critical but more constructive? Or, as an academic, but also as a judge, maybe. Maybe you would have understood, given that you have seen how politics is difficult. And the second question is on the reform you are doing, which are major and I imagine extremely difficult to do. Why do you think you will manage to do it, or I mean your government will manage to do it, while we know it's a problem in Italy since ever? So are we in a specific circumstances that make your reform a success, or will make your reform a success, or it's too early to tell?
So the first question, it's easier. I would say no, that critiques are good, even if they are strong. But I would say that a constructive critique takes into account everything. What I don't like is the kind of critique that is very abstract. You have the abstract model, and this is not pure. This idea that law has to be a pure model is something that does not take into consideration the law as a practical side, and sometimes I prefer having mixed model, not from the theoretical point of view, perfect models, but that can work, rather than the ideal that is not able to affect the reality. Critiques are useful, and I think that all people that have responsibility is required to keep the mind open to critiques, and not to be afraid to change, or to be open to the possibility of correcting. There is one thing that I keep on mentioning, is the fact that we have a technique of legislation in Italy, that is the delegation law, which is the parliament that gives the government the power to issue some acts, that provides in the law of legislation already the possibility of correcting and redressing what it doesn't work. Because when you have to make reforms, it is clear that you cannot envisage everything, and the possibility of missing the point, overstating some aspects is always there. So laws are not for a perfect world. The reform is an ongoing process, and how to come to a better reform, listening to those who can tell you, wait, attention, this is something that cannot work, and so correct it. For example, I'm doing something like that in the Civil Procedure Act that is expected to be approved next week. We missed one point, and I didn't have any problem to say, everybody, okay, this is true, we can do it better. The other point.
The condition of success of your reform.
The condition of success, I don't know. I mean, I think that starting a process of reform is really starting a process. We are moving our first step, the foundation of a big building. I'm trying to do my best to dive a solid foundation, but the reform of the judicial system is really a collective work. The Minister of Justice cannot do it alone, even less in Italy, because I need the cooperation with the High Council of Justice. I cannot give orders to the judges. Thanks God, thanks to the rule of law, because there is the independence of the judges. And so the result is that I'm traveling all over Italy to try to motivate the judges, because they have to do their part. If they do not take their responsibility and decide that it is time for making a change in our system, from the building of Via Renula, I cannot decide everything. It's not like, being in a military service where you give orders to the judges. The Minister of Justice does not have this power. So I don't know if in the end we will be completely successful, 80% successful, 70% successful. For sure, I think that we are trying to do our best, and also to try to involve all the cooperation of all the stakeholders, which are not only the politicians, but also the judges and all the personnel that is working in the judicial system.
We are coming close to an end. Gronia, I plan to ask Marta some desert island questions.
That's fine.
But do you want to ask a question before that?
No. All right.
So here are some desert island questions. So you're on a desert island, and I'm being very generous with you. You can take 3 books.
Okay.
While you're thinking, you're on the same desert island, and you can take 3 pieces of music.
Okay.
And you're on the desert island, and somehow magically, the best kitchen in the world can prepare your most favorite meal.
Okay, very good. So starting with the books, well, the first one that comes to my mind is Victor Hugo, Les Misérables. Indeed, the Bible. And which one?
That's a nice
Because
case.
what?
That's a nice case. Hugo versus Isaiah.
Well, I've read very recently a wonderful book that was so interesting for me, but I'm not sure that will be my favorite in the long term. I will tell you in any case. This is a French writer, Cambiare l'acqua ai fiori, to change water to the flowers, Valérie Perrin. It is a wonderful fiction, especially the protagonist is a woman. Very, very, very nice. Let's say that the 3 of these. The pieces of music.
You know what? I'll give another discount. It can be composers.
Composers.
Including rock, pop, poveri ricchi or ricchi.
Schubert, you know that it is my favorite since ever. Schubert, the opera cento, Schubert in general, from the classical. Then I would say, why not, the Pink Floyd, I like it. And some Italian, probably I'm getting older because I come to hear again and again the old Italian composer of the 70s, of the 80s, like, Baglioni, this kind of people, and I'm enjoying it again. Exactly. And then my favorite food, parmigiana di melanzane. This is
so one last desert island question. You can actually leave the desert island to your ideal vacation place.
This will be in the mountains. This will be my favorite place. Is actually the place where I spend my holidays, which is in the mountains in the north of Italy.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Marta Cartabia.
Thank you.